pregnancy and alcohol. Is the combination as dangerous as we've so often heard? The debate next on Larry King Live.
Welcome back to the show. There's a controversial new book out that says drinking wine in moderation while pregnant is okay and may in fact even be beneficial, that a drink a day may keep the doctor away. But for years, pregnant women have been advised not to drink at all or risk condemning their unborn children to impaired lives. Tonight, two guests with very different views. Joining us in Washington, Dr. David Witten, one of the authors of To Your Health, the book that explores the health benefits of wine. It's published by HarperCollins. And Patty Munter, the Executive Director of the National Organization on Fetal Alcohol Syndrome. We thank both of you for being with us. What's the best available medical evidence right now on any link between drinking and fetal alcohol syndrome? Ask you both.
Well, we know that that drinking heavily causes fetal alcohol syndrome in a percentage of women who drink heavily. We also know that all of the fetal alcohol babies, that is, the babies who have the fully developed fetal alcohol syndrome, are the product of a pregnancy in which the mother drinks abusively, chronically throughout pregnancy. We also know that there's an entity known as fetal alcohol effect, in which the mother drinks heavily for at least a significant portion of her pregnancy. The issue that Patty and people like her are raising with our book has to do with a much more vaguely defined and much more difficult to measure entity.
Tell us the problem you have with the book, if any, and that stands.
The problem I have with the book is really that there is no medical evidence at all that drinking while you're pregnant is okay. And this book takes it a step farther and actually says that it's good for you. This book is just filled with bad science. It's irresponsible. I mean, when a pregnant woman drinks alcohol, she's putting her child at risk for fetal alcohol syndrome, which is the leading known cause of mental retardation. It is irreversible, but the good news is it's 100% preventable. And we're just sort of astounded that these doctors are asking American women to play Russian roulette with the health of their unborn children.
Nick, you know, the fact is that we're not wild-eyed, crazy doctors. We're not the first ones to have said exactly what we're saying. It's just that what we're saying is not on the back pages of some arcane medical journal. There are plenty of very sane and sober scientists and docs who have been saying for years, people who are actively involved in fetal alcohol syndrome research,
I just have to disagree for one moment, because they actually are the only two doctors in the entire world that have come up with the
drinking could be beneficial. In what way, doctor? How can drinking in moderation help a pregnant woman?
First of all, we know for certain that the #1 killer of men and women is heart disease. And we also know for as close as certain as is possible to know with the body of medical science and available data, that having alcohol in moderation in the light regular quantities that we recommend has a significant positive effect on heart disease risk. We know, for example, that men and women alike enjoy anywhere between a 25 and 50% reduction in heart disease mortality. And that's not just heart disease mortality. More recent studies have shown that it reduces the risk of heart disease per se. That is, heart disease that doesn't result in heart attack.
I mean, a glass of wine a night would be good for stress, for example.
Well, a glass of wine at night may be good for stress, but that's not the effect it has on heart disease. The effect it has on heart disease is much more complicated and has to do with reduction of platelet adhesiveness. It has to do with clotting, and it has to do with improvement in the high-density lipoprotein level, the HDL-LDL ratio, those kinds of things. The impact on lipid metabolism is possibly an important part, as well as antioxidant effects that wine has.
Patty, when you hear this medical
When I hear this, I just really have to think about the hundreds of phone calls and letters I get every single week from mothers who were told by their doctors to go ahead and have a few drinks to relax during their pregnancy, and they now have children with permanent and lifelong disabilities. A few drinks lasted a lifetime. I mean, the Surgeons General of the United States, the Centers for Disease Control, the Journal for the American Medical Association, I can go on and on and on. I'll refute the findings of this book. They are, again, asking American women to play Russian roulette with the lives of their unborn children, and I'm just confused as to why they would ask women to take that kind of risk.
Nick, I'm sorry, but what Patty is saying is simply not true. What we have determined in this society, increasingly and far too much, we have our social agenda set by a small group of well-organized zealots who, for whatever reason, feel that by saying over and over something is true and have the tendency to drown out the opposition.
I'm a social drinker. I like Chardonnay just as much as anybody else does. This is not about social drinking. What we are saying
drinking
here
is about social. Unfortunately, it's socially acceptable in this country.
That's
Fortunately or unfortunately,
it's
depending on your
drug,
perspective.
but what I'm trying to say here is the National Organization on Fetal Alcohol Syndrome is not a temperance organization. We are not anti-alcohol. What we are saying is that if you are pregnant, if you're trying to get pregnant or you may be pregnant, there is no safe amount of alcohol during pregnancy, nor is there a safe period of time to drink during your pregnancy. And I just want to say, you know, I always understood that the first rule of medicine was to do no harm. And these doctors have put a very dangerous book out in the public, and they're asking American women to do a great deal of harm to future children, and it really offends me.
Do you think you're educating the public, Doctor?
Ms. Munter is just simply mistaken. The data is very, very potent. There's quite a lot of data.
Is the Surgeon General of the United States mistaken?
The Surgeon General's public health message, unhappily, is not an accurate message. The public health message says, thou shalt not drink during pregnancy. The reality is that we know that all of the fetal alcohol syndrome babies come from heavily abusive, heavily drinking women who drink throughout their pregnancy.
You know, Nick, I met a woman last week in Boston whose doctor told her to drink 3 glasses of beer during her pregnancy to relax. She now has a 9-year-old daughter with full-blown fetal alcohol syndrome, and she is very offended by this book, as am I.
The public health message, you're going to take a break?
No, what I want to do is pick up on that point. If there's education needed medically and publicly.
Indeed.
We'll be back with that in a moment with more of this very important debate. This is Larry King live from Washington. Stay with us. King live with Dr. David Witten, who argues that drinking in moderation during pregnancy may actually be beneficial, and Patty Munter of the National Organization of Fetal Alcohol Syndrome, who disagrees. Joining us on the phone now from Albuquerque, New Mexico, is Dr. John Acey, a pediatrician who's worked in the field of fetal alcohol syndrome for over 20 years and is considered one of its leading experts. Dr. Acey, from what you've heard so far, can you assess the conversation, the debate, and where do you stand on this?
Yeah, Mr. Carter, I share some of the concerns expressed by Ms. Munter about the substance of the book that has come out. The authors make one point about the threshold effect of toxic substances. Most of the things that we know that injure people do so in fairly large amounts, and small amounts may be harmless, but we don't know what that threshold is for alcohol damage to babies before they're born.
How much research have you done, Dr. Whitman?
Well, actually, that's not true. We know a fair amount about the threshold. We know, for example, that growth retardation occurs from a recent study that Robert Sokol did, occurs at a threshold that is at least at the level of 4 drinks per day. We know that that's true for growth retardation. We also know from a couple of studies that the threshold of reported drinking, which, as you know, is always a very conservative estimate of how much drinking actually occurs, the threshold for any kind of effect on mental development is well over 1 drink a day. And you know very well, being active in the field, that there are quite a few sane and sober scientists who have reported data clearly showing that having a healthy amount of drinking in one's lifestyle can correlate very well with a healthy lifestyle.
Dr. Acey, what do you tell other pediatricians, what do you tell OBGYNs about threshold? At what point is an unborn child at risk? What's the educational process?
What I usually try to stress is that every pregnancy is different and every woman is different, and that some women may put their babies at risk even with a modest amount of drinking during pregnancy. We can't predict which pregnancies are going to be in danger.
Although you don't have any evidence for that. I mean, there really is no evidence for that.
That's true, Dr. Whitten, because, as you may know, some studies by Nancy Day in Pittsburgh,
right,
corresponding with earlier studies by Ann Streiskuth in Washington.
And those studies represent basically looking at primarily 3rd trimester heavy drinking.
No, as a matter of fact, Dr. Day's and Dr. Streiskuth's studies were in women who were drinking in the average of 2 to 3 drinks per day, and they found a detectable IQ drop and are now finding behavioral changes as well as the children grow older. So the loss of 5, 7, 10 IQ points is not an insignificant result from
let me just point out
light exposure to alcohol.
Let me just point out to you and to the thousands of other doctors who are watching and listening that this is a complicated subject, no doubt. But the statistical analyses that are done to try to arrive at, to parse out the differences between populations based on what Dr. Azzi just spoke of, are exactly the same kind of very difficult and arcane statistical analyses that once were used in yesteryear to show the difference in intelligence between the black race and the white race. These kinds of statistical analyses are very, very difficult, and in fact, the great majority of studies show absolutely no effect.
I think Dr. Azzi, though, basically is saying, why take the risk at all and why drink?
As a matter of fact, I don't believe it's fair to tar these studies with the same brush, because they're being done very carefully and by very qualified folks who've been, I think, quite open in their acknowledgement that this is a complicated topic. But with that in mind, the effects of alcohol are so permanent and distressing and life-threatening in some instances that the question remains, why take the chance?
But Dr. Azzi, when you advise your patients, I mean, part of what you have to be about as a pediatrician and as a physician is advising people on relative risk and relative benefit. And the fact is that that we know that wine drinking is good for you and the levels that we recommend, and we know that the risk is very low.
Well, we'll have to continue on more on this controversial subject because obviously the two doctors here are at opposite ends of the spectrum on this one. Larry King Live continues. Stay with us. Nick Charles back on Larry King Live. We're discussing fetal alcohol syndrome. A final comment, Patty Munter?
Yeah, I just wanted to say I wasn't surprised to see Robert Mondavi endorsing this book on its flip, and I'm just sort of curious. These doctors are asking us to believe Robert Mondavi over the Surgeon General of the United States. These doctors are in the business of selling books. Robert Mondavi is selling wine.
Do you have any ties to the wine industry?
I have no ties to the wine industry.
We're in the business of trying to prevent children from being born with permanent disabilities, and I'll leave it there.
And I'm a specialist in life or death medicine, and I make my living and I work every day in the trenches doing emergency medicine. Three things. Number one, women who are out there, the millions of you are watching, we're not asking you to start drinking if you're not already enjoying a healthy amount of drinking in your regularly well-balanced life, number one. Number two, we want you to talk to your doctor. Docs out there, be prepared to discuss this with the women who come to you. Number three, the public health message is misguided, it's simplistic, it wastes resources on the population that is not at risk. The population at risk.
Unfortunately, we're out of time. I'm sorry. I'd like to continue this discussion, but thanks to all our guests, Dr. David Witten and Patty Munter.